Welcome back to Endurance Icons, where we sit down with individuals crushing it in the wide world of endurance sports. We got an awesome episode for you today. We got Canadian cycling legend Svein Tuft on the podcast today. Well known for some Grand Tour wins that he had, some stages in there, many Canadian national titles, and also for his epic adventures, which I'm excited to hear about all those stories today. So welcome, Svein. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so where are you coming to us from today?
I am just outside of Nelson, British Columbia in the Kootenays. Yeah, it's a pretty quiet little spot, right up my alley. Yeah.
And I understand you were living in Andorra up till a couple years ago. When did you make the move back to BC and why?
Yeah, well, long story short, we were living up in Andorra, beautiful little spot. I retired from cycling and I was starting a business there. And it just so happened to coincide with the big pandemic. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall as I knew that my business was relying on international travel. And I just thought, wow, this could be a couple of years of trying to keep this thing afloat with no real business, So we'd always talked about going back to Canada, but that just kind of helped. And at the time we had our second child on the way, and we just thought we better go get grounded and ride this thing out, get back closer to family and that. So yeah, that kind of, it's funny now we look back and we miss a lot about Andorra, and it's possible we might make our way back into Europe at some point down the road. But yeah, those are all things you don't know until you know, right?
Yeah, not a bad landing spot out in BC though, so you can still probably fulfill some of your need for those adventures.
For sure. I mean, it's just, I have to say that's one thing about this place is it's still very wild. Like if I look at like ease of travel in the backcountry in Europe compared to this part of the world, wow, it's just it's a world of difference. It's far more gnarlier. Let's just put it that way.
I love it. That Canadian grit, I'm sure, helped you a bunch in your racing career. As we kick it off here, I'd love to. We got the Giro going on right now, which I know you rode a number of times, maybe about 7 times. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Sweet. And we got our fellow Canadian Derek G, who's been in about 3 or 4 breakaways now, just on the cusp of some stage wins. What do you make of what's going on there and the Giro kind of route as a whole?
Look, what Derek is doing in his first Giro is like, I know people are impressed and everyone's, psyched. What he's doing is incredible because as a neo pro and a grand tour, it's hard enough to just finish the bloody stage in the bunch. And he's out there in these gnarly weather, gnarly days in the breakaway with climbers, with all sorts of like hardened pros, battling for the win. The first day he was in the breakaway, I was like, oh, good on him. Like sometimes you think like with a neo pro, like this is just how it is. Like in like older guys that have been around, it's like, oh yeah, he got lucky, like got put on breakaway duty and it worked out. This is not the case with Derek. I mean, like when you can back it up day in and day out and be in the break that many times now and be fighting each time for the win, it's incredible what he's doing. Like, yeah, big hats off. And it's like I said, I tend to not watch bike races, but I am watching bike racing, watching the Giro again, at least the highlights anyway.
Yeah, I've been glued to that. Tell me about how you're catching up on those highlights. You were telling me a little bit about how you're doing that before the show, balancing family and life.
Yeah, like with kids and that at a certain age, they're pretty hands-on all day. There's not a lot of TV watching. We don't really promote TV watching in our house. So I do have a moment when I get the sauna going for the evening, and I'll generally just play the highlights, keep the phone down low so it doesn't cook, and I kind of listen to basically the day's events. So yeah,
I love
that's
it.
that's my free time these days.
The relaxation of some of your favorite things, relaxing, zoning out, and some cycling at the same time. Your happy place.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I love it. And one Canadians have been on a bit of a roll this year. Where you tuned in for Allison Jackson's big Paris-Roubaix win as well?
Of course, yeah. I mean, but there again, it's no real surprise. I've known Allison for quite a while, and always kind of figured that was going to be in the cards. She was going to pull off a big monument win, and she did the big one. So that's that it's just fitting for her, and yeah, super happy for her. Like but it, like I said, it doesn't surprise me. She's just such I mean, she's just so consistent and so strong, and when you ride like that, or you are a rider like that, you just go so many chances to succeed. Like the ones who are up and down and always doing like these crazy fluctuations, it's just, yeah, it's hard to have a consistent season, and she's just year in year out, she's just super strong and crushing it at every race. So yeah, she's been great to watch, and
And did
super
you
super
ride
happy.
did you do Paris-Roubaix a couple times in your day, or did
I
they
did,
take?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
What did
yeah.
you think of those experiences? Tell us
Uh,
about the vibe
I
around
mean,
that race. It looks
yeah,
gnarly.
that's a whole other podcast, so I'll just try and keep it short. But like, people don't understand how friggin' insane those cobbles are. Like when you these sections, even the nice sections, like if you ever get the chance to be in that part of France and go and just ride in those on some of those sectors, it's scarring to think like, like when you race across it, it's like, for example, at the end of Roubaix, your hands, everything in your body are just, it's hard to even explain, but everything just hurts and is swollen, because you've never experienced that much like vibration and bashing on a bike, even like on like hard gravel descents and stuff like that. It's not even close. Because the other thing is, like, you're going full gas over the cobbles, like with everything, you're using everything in your body, and you're getting jarred and smashed around on the bike. Like, yeah, it's hard to explain. And you add in a bit of rain and all this kind of stuff. It's stressful, and it's a real battle on the bike. Really crazy race.
And jumping back to the Giro, you rode that a number of times in your career as well. When you think back on that race, is there like one stage or one year that really like comes to mind that's a really like high moment, or a really good memory for you from your Giro days?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 2014. We came out and won the opening team time trial. The team that year was just on another level, and we kind of smashed it the first 10 days. Riding on the front, we had the jersey kind of passed around through everyone. It was just, we were on this great high, and then guys just started falling off left, right, and center. Guys getting sick, guys crashing, and by the third week, there was just two of us left, me, myself, and Michael Hepburn. And it was just so crazy because we had all the infrastructure, the bus and all this staff hanging around. It's just the two of us, but like we'd accomplished everything we'd set out to do that Giro. So we'd lost all of our teammates, and it was just like Michael and I hanging out, having a good time. We were hanging out with the staff a lot in the evenings, and it was just a really special Giro that, like, for myself, I'll never forget it till the day I die. Yeah, it's a really good one.
So epic. And you got to ride the Tour as well. Is there one that you prefer over the other, Giro versus Tour? And what were your Tour experiences like?
Yeah, it's funny, because the 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 nations that those races represent really are kind of special too. So like, France is very, like, the Tour de France is very much French. The Giro is very much Italian, and the Giro is organized chaos. It's like earlier in the year, so the weather's always a factor. Um, for me, it's a far more for me, it's my favorite race, just because of the challenges of the weather and the kind of way the Italians set things up. There's always a surprise. There's always drama. There's always yeah, it's just there's not a rhythm to that race. It can get pretty pear-shaped pretty quickly, and I think that's what's special about it. Whereas the Tour is far more controlled, and as a rider, you fight to get to the Tour de France. Everyone wants to be the Tour de France. You're not actually considered a professional cyclist unless you do the Tour de France in most people's eyes. And it's one of those things, you get there and you just realize how stressful it is. And I remember my first Tour de France, I should have just done that one and been good with it, because it was the best Tour de France. We won the team time trial in Nice, still the fastest ever recorded stage in the Tour de France. And we won stages. We protected the yellow jersey for, I can't remember how many days, 3 days or something. And it was a really special edition, and I fought hard to finish that one, because it was my first one, and I'd done so much work in the first week that I was just hanging on for life. And then after that, my tours after that just didn't live up to that same experience. So yeah, I just think it's far too stressful. The riders tend to do a lot more crazy things just because it's such a spectacle. Everyone's trying to show themselves at that race because the world is watching in a way, in the cycling world. So I think I've never liked that style, and it does happen at the monuments too. It's just kind of that guys know there's so much on the line, so they tend to do things out of just not normal, right? They take risks, and they sometimes race desperate. And I've never liked that style, just because you put others at risk. That's another thing about like Roubaix. It's just all about risk taking too.
Mhm. Totally. So jumping over to some more of your pieces in the pro career before we get into some more of the adventure side of things. You amassed a bunch of Canadian championships in your day too. Is there some good memories that jump back from some of those? Because I think you had a bunch of TT wins, a couple road champs in there. Any years that really jump out in your mind as some good memories?
For sure, yeah. My first TT win against Wahlberg, that stands out for me, because I just, in those years, I didn't believe it was possible to beat the mighty Eric Wahlberg, who anyone who follows the sport knows that he was the man for however many years prior to my time. And so yeah, when I beat him in 2004 in Kamloops, that was huge, because we just started the Symmetrics team, and it was just like a realization that, okay, we can do this. We're at that level. And then another one that stands out was on the road, when I won on the road. I think it was 2014. Is that right? Or 2014 or 2015. Anyways, road solo for like 100K. And it was just more it was the effort that I gauged almost perfectly, like with chasers like Mike Woods and Guillaume Boivin, and some really good guys, Hugo Houle chasing from behind. I was able to just ride the pace I knew that I could do. Coming out of the Giro, I just had that. Sometimes when you come out of Grand Tour, you're either absolutely buggered, or you're able to just find this extra gear, right? And that was one of those moments. And it's just rare, like when those moments come together in a race, right? So it was just nice to experience that at a nationals.
So was that like a solo breakaway you had on that day?
Yeah, solo breakaway. And it was, it
Nice.
was kind of course, it was lumpy. It had a solid climb, and everyone was just smashing on the climb. But then over the top, everyone just kind of look at each other, like, right? And I hit him on the top over down the descent, got a gap, and then I just like, okay, well, this is early, but it's not the kind of race you want to wait to go mano a mano with Mike Woods up the climb and think you're going to drop him. You have to do things out of the ordinary, right? So yeah, it was just a cool experience all around for that.
Amazing. And you got to racing at Olympics as well. Did you ever think you would end up racing at an Olympics? And what was that experience like?
No, to be honest, all the stuff I did in cycling, I never thought I would. And yeah, to go to Beijing and do the ride that I did, like, yeah, that year, '08 was really special one for me, but like I really started putting things together as a rider. And that course in Beijing didn't suit me at all. But I had a great ride for myself. So that's a moment I'm really proud of. Sometimes you go to a big event and you kind of let it kill you in a way. Like you tend to overanalyze and get too worked up with all the other things going on. But that was just a moment I was in the zone and actually had, to be honest, that's the best I could have done on that day. Really, like I had to piece together TT bike, just mix and match parts, and everything else was, yeah, it was just hard work. And it was, I'm truly happy about that one.
So you ended up
So
seventh on the day. Who was do you remember who was on the podium of that race?
yeah, Cancellara, Contador, kind of like the who's who of that
Yeah, a couple
era.
small names.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who else was up there. Um, I'd have to go back and look, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was like really like it was a real, yeah, a lot of the hitters of that era.
Yeah,
So
I think that gives some context of who you were up against and to finish seventh in that field on a piece together TT bike. I think that
yeah,
shows you were a monster then.
yeah, it was just again one of those days where the stars aligned on the day, and you were just able to push with all your might.
I love it. And then you mentioned that team symmetrics a bit. I'd heard something about like a comic book with that team. Is that like a tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had a guy, Matt Hansen, who was part of the team originally, and a real friend of the team, and he kind of somehow scripted together this comic book about the team. And yeah, it was like a marketing type of tool, but it was just, yeah, it's pretty funny, you know, when I look, we have a few copies kicking around, you know, and it's just, it's funny piece of history for us, I think, like all everyone who was involved, right?
I love it. I feel like a team needs to bring that back. That's awesome. I'd love
Yeah.
to see a copy of that. That would be hilarious. Cool. So I'd love to hop in. So that was a little bit about your pro racing career, but I think one of the pieces I really want to touch a bunch on is kind of your adventures and also kind of your training that led up to a bunch of this like amazing career that you had. So first of all, I'd love to hear like when you were obviously based in Andorra for a while, but do you have, when you look back on it, like a favorite training location around the world that if you just had to go back and ride your bike, that would be the spot?
Ooh, that's a big one. Yeah, there's a lot of great places in this world, but I have to say the Dolomites, some of my just there's just so much to do there. Like just a beautiful part of the world. Um, and to be honest, like the Ariège part of France, like which is backside of Andorra, there's something there that just calls me all the time. It's like the closest I feel to being in Canada, British Columbia, in Europe. So if you're not familiar, the Ariège is just like a really remote part of France, tucked in on the in the Pyrenees there, and there's just not a lot going on, and I love that. Like so, now I love like the gravel riding. Well, I always have, but just like the touring and exploring, and it's just so easy. There's all these old mountain passes and old trails and things that they, you know, that the sheep herders use to travel around in the high country. And so, you know, access and travel is just, it's so easy and so nice. So really, yeah, like that place where we were living, Andorra, it was access to all that stuff. So yeah, I feel really fortunate to have gotten to live there all those years, and I got to explore so much, you know. So I count myself very lucky.
And were you spending a fair amount of time like off road on like a gravel bike or mountain bike when you were in your pro career, like in or out of season?
Yeah, yeah. As I got older, I started to realize the same old template of just training and doing the same climb 10 times a day and hitting the lap button. It wasn't working. You need a different stimulus. And I'd been doing it so many years. and there's always that component of exploration that I love. And so I started talking with Mark Quad, who was like I was working with for years, and I was just like, yeah, I got to start changing things up. And so that's when I started loading up the bike packing bags and traveling across the Pyrenees over to the Basque Country. And I would just do like different routes across the Pyrenees, because I could spend a lifetime there, I think, and never get bored of that part of the world. Like France has to be one of the best places for bike touring, period. Just if I compare it to like a trip here in BC, it's just so much easier. Like you can do some gnarly stuff, but also have the niceties of life, like getting into a village and getting some good food and all that stuff. So yeah, I started doing these long trips. And so what I would do is I'd do like 3 or 4 days across the Pyrenees, and then I'd come back, rest, and then I'd do some intensity. And so I'd just kind of mix up my training. And it was strange because that was a new stimulus for me, and it actually worked quite well in my later years, because also my team was evolving into more of a Grand Tour riding team. So that means I had to change a bit what I was kind of good at, and kind of become a different rider. So that was a good part of that process to help that evolution. But it also just mentally, it just kept me a lot more sane and content and happy, because I just felt like I was getting to do the stuff that I really love to do.
So were you somebody who enjoyed like looking at the data, whether it was like heart rate, power, like your overall weekly volume? Were you somebody that tracked that closely, or you just left that to the team principal to deal with? Or what was your
No,
kind of take on that?
it's funny because like I still am very interested in that stuff. I don't think what I think it's important for is a baseline.
Mhm.
And I think like to live vicariously through it day in, day out is not a good way. It's just like any metric. Like if you're always obsessing about it, like I think of all these sleep tracking
Trackers, yeah.
devices, right? It's great data, and it's great to have a baseline if it was correct. Most of the time, I don't believe it's correct, first of all. And second of all, I think that it tends to head crack people, because they start looking at that, and then kind of now that affects their entire day, because the thing said their sleep wasn't just perfect, or their HRV's out of whack, and while that can be handy, it can sometimes just cause way too much stress and analyzing too much. And I think we're in a funny time right now, because we just have way too much data at our fingertips, and I think that it causes more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, the thing I'm finding the most is when athletes start working with me right away, especially when they're coming in at like a baseline level right away, they want to go to like all these data pieces. And it's like, take a step back, get in tune with what your body's actually doing and how you're feeling. And then we can use these to support you as you continue to improve. But like, man, it's like getting a little bit dangerous. I think people are so out of touch with how they're feeling.
100%. Like I harp on that so much. Like, yeah, this stuff is only great when you know what's happening in your own body yourself first. So, yeah, I could go on and on about that, but I feel we're on the same page there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Like your power meter could be totally off that day, or your heart rate monitor might not be working. Your GPS is off. Like,
Yeah.
guys, it's might not work that day. And what are you going to do when it doesn't? Like, you need to be
Yeah.
able to rely on your
Yeah.
intuition there. So it's a dangerous one.
Yeah.
Wild one. So looking back on some of your like training there, just talking about a little bit of the data because I think people would find it interesting when you were in some of those like peak sort of training weeks for something like a Grand Tour, like a Giro, like that. Like, what do you have a concept of like how many hours a week you were training, and kind of what that would look like in terms of a week, in terms of intensity, or just tons of base riding, climbing? Give us a snapshot of a week if you can.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of variables in there, because also there's build up races prior to like a Giro. So quite often you'll go into Romandy prior to the Giro. That's like a 6-day stage race, very hard. Usually the weather shit. It's in Switzerland, so it's like in the mountains, and usually there's a stage canceled So it's like kind of getting through that. That's like a big load, and sometimes they'll pull you out of it early just to rest you, depending on the work you've done prior. So then you'll go back. I would do the classics and then have a break after Roubaix or something. So that gave me some time to build up to Romandy. So in that time, I'd have like 2 or 3 weeks to actually do some bigger stuff after the recovery, and that also always depended on. Sorry, I'm getting into details here, but it
I love
depended
it.
on your recovery from the Northern Classics, which are very taxing. So sometimes you come out great, other times you come out in a coffin, you know. So if things went well, then you would start building up and you'd have a couple big weeks. And I would say that could be anywhere from, I know myself, sometimes 30 to almost 40 hours, because in a grand tour, you will experience a 40-hour week. In the Giro, it's not strange to have a 42-hour week, and that's of racing. So it's about adjusting the body to that load. And so you need to kind of get the body prepped and then almost start coming down off of that, right? So it's like ramping up, coming down, intensity within the race, and then essentially backing off until the Giro starts. And that's like backing off, but keeping the intensity up so that the engine stays open, because as you know, like after a load like that, you can shut down. And so it's a tricky business, and everyone is very different, but that's kind of how I would approach something like that. I think of like preparing for the Vuelta was a different story. It's hot in the summer. You don't want to tax the body doing big long rides in the heat, prior to something that you're already going to be in 35, 40 degree weather. So then, it's like trying to find that sweet spot. So it's like every grand tour has a different buildup, right? The guys nowadays who are doing the Tour de France, well, they'll basically just be pulled aside. They're doing a specific tour camp right now. They'll go into the Criterium du Dauphiné or Tour Suisse, and then sometimes their selection won't even be made until those races. So they'll have done all that work, and they might go like shit, and the director might just say, yeah, you're gonna stay home in July. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in behind the scenes there that we don't really know, because you have, on a team, you have 30 guys going for those spots, right?
So on that heat prep note, if you weren't smashing yourself in like some of the longer heat stuff, would you do any separate like heat specific sort of training, whether it was like sauna stuff or things like that, to make sure that you were prepped to take
Always.
on 35 degree weather?
Yeah, we used to do some crazy sauna stuff. Like, yeah, you would train, like you'd be in Girona or Andorra, and it'd already be like 30 something degrees, and you'd be out for 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever. And the protocol was to like come back, have like some drinks to like hydrate, but then to go like straight into the sauna still warm, and then basically like see how long you could go, right? And not in the sense of like killing yourself, but like
Yeah.
initially you start out like 15 minutes, kind of 20 minutes, and working your way up to like 30 minutes. And then really, like, once you're out, it's not about like instantly cooling and instantly hydrating. It's like allowing the body to fight back to cooling. So yeah, we did a lot of sauna stuff. Like, yeah, lots of stories there. But I mean, for me, it's one of the best performance enhancers, period. Heat adaptation is number one.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we do a ton of it here. It's like our poor man's altitude, especially when we don't have in Ontario where it's cold and there's no mountains or anything like that. Then we got to do what
Yeah,
we can with the heat to get those adaptations.
totally. And it's like why I still do sauna to this day. I don't care about performance or whatever, but like the benefits I felt from doing that my whole career, it's a part of me now, that I just, yeah, can't get enough.
Yeah, that's our next big purchase for the backyard is a barrel sauna back here. We'll get some weird looks
Nice.
from the neighbors living beside a path, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you had mentioned like some of those races get up to like, or training even like a 40-hour week. Like, how are you fueling yourself both off the bike and on the bike during that like crazy amount of calories that you're burning in a week like that. Do you have some like go-tos, calorie pack sort of things? And has anything changed what you guys used on the bike back then versus all the kind of fuel mixes and stuff they use today?
It has changed. I mean, as you know, like I think of over 20 years, how much I've seen change, like I was around for the early part of all that, like low carb, fat adaptation kind of training, and that was interesting. I think somewhat ineffective in the sense of a sport like cycling where it's so dynamic. During that time, you really just have to eat. And I think the times that I was trying to maybe not fuel wisely, and maybe in the sense of trying to lose weight or whatever, you just paid. It was just not, your body knows what to do in those moments. So if you're not carrying stress, if you're not carrying a bunch of other things that are raising your cortisol, your body should be able to do the rest. So you need to fuel it and be wise with your fueling, obviously. But I think we overcomplicate this stuff way too much. And it's a topic I could go on and on about, and I would never claim to be like a guru with it, but I saw a lot of stuff over the years that just clearly didn't work or was very damaging to young bodies. So yeah, while I was also very curious about, because I loved nutrition throughout my career, like just paying attention and trying to have an understanding, you also have to try things and learn things the hard way too, right? So I certainly did my fair share of that. But I think when I sure, it really came full circle in the sense of just keeping it as simple as possible, eating real food, right? Things that don't come in packages and boxes, and eating enough, right? I just don't think you can go wrong with that. The body really knows what it needs to do as long as you give it the right tools. And to think that we know, like more than nature is, it's a joke.
Yeah, I know we're getting the same messages podcast after podcast. If our listeners aren't realizing that the pro athletes have it figured out by now, that you just got to eat enough is the key, then I don't know how we can hammer it home anymore at this point.
Yeah, totally.
So around those weight battles pieces, did you ever have some times where you had like built up in your head that you had to be like some optimal weight to perform? Like, did you have some battles in your career, either passed down from like somebody high up in your team who's like, hey, you need to trim down, or just like that you had put on yourself?
I was pretty lucky. I was on good teams, and I think most people kind of gave me a free rein, because I think where it really starts to come into question is if you aren't performing. And I was lucky, like, even though I did like try many different things, I was always making sure to fuel enough. So with that always came consistent performance. So then I wasn't like, basically I was always there when I was needed most of the time. So I think it's just when you cannot perform, then they start to go, okay, what the hell's going on with this guy? And then they start to scrutinize you. So I was very lucky with the teams that I was on. They respected me. And I was kind of allowed to do, because it was also, a lot of times during an era where doctors were coming around with trying to give guys complexes, they'd come in the morning with the weigh scales and the calipers and all this stuff, right? And talk about a dysfunctional kind of system, right? They didn't really give you any real advice other than, you got to eat less and you got to drop like 5 kilos, you fat guy. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, there was no real knowledge shared or passed down. It was just like, you're too fat. And I saw it so many times, like crushing guys, because they're trying so hard. And like I mentioned that whole thing before with the stress, right? Guys who are stressed don't tend to shed weight. And so you get into these horrible cycles where you starve yourself, train super hard, cortisol levels go even higher, trying to deal with that stress. And then on top of that, you're not eating. And then all of a sudden, boom, you blow up, and then you got to eat like 10,000 calories just to get back to baseline again, to feeling okay. So it's like this horrible cycle. And I just, once I'd kind of seen how that works, I was like, that's not a way to go through life, no matter what you get, So I was always trying to figure it out, to try and find that sweet spot. But I knew, like, just my frame and everything, like I was bigger. I was always going to be bigger. If I went and cross country skied in the winter, I'd put on kilos in my shoulder, in your back and everything, right? Because that's what happens. You're using those muscles. And I always wanted to have a more normal life. The complete trade-off just to be some great cyclist wasn't worth it to me. So I enjoyed my life outside of cycling, and sometimes that made it harder work when I got back into the season. That's okay. I don't have any regrets, because I just think, like, people get too carried away, like, and this is the only thing, and this is the most important thing right now. And that's okay. If that's the trade you want to make, that's fine. But I know for myself, I needed to have those moments where I did what I also love to do, and that rigid, strict way of life, you just can't do it all year long, right?
Yeah, I definitely like gathered that from reading about your career and seeing your Instagram, that you were a huge proponent of that, like being a balanced human over this bit. I think it's a super important piece. You can still be committed without being obsessed, and maybe that works for some people and that's the avenue they have to go. But you clearly went the more balanced approach and had some incredible success still. So what were some of the like sports and activities you were doing outside of cycling, to keep that kind of stoke high for yourself?
Yeah, I love cross country skiing. I love ski touring. There was a a few seasons early on where I got really caught up in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like mixed martial arts. I was obsessed with that. I remember I started the 2006 season. I was probably 215 pounds. I was on metrics. I'd been
Just
like
ripped.
wrestling all winter. I was just I was just too big. And that took a lot of work. I remember, like, I was going to the Commonwealth Games fairly early in the season that year, and I was still way too big. But like, I felt strong. As long as I didn't have to go over big climbs, I was okay. But yeah, it's unfortunately the sport is, and now more than ever, just watts per kilo game. And yeah, there wouldn't, like, yeah, I'm really glad, like, I experimented and got to do all that stuff, because I think it helps me now as I'm retired. I didn't trade everything for cycling. So what I mean by that is, like, just load bearing stuff, right? Like, doing, like, I know many guys who, they, like, in their career, they won't even walk 100 meters. It's a big blowout for them, and I just think, like, oof. And I look at, like, the crashes guys are having in their later years, and they're always breaking stuff, always breaking things. So it's like, okay, bone density, your spine, everything is, like, changing into this cycling position, right? And I just think that's super unhealthy. Like, I love cycling. I think it's one of the more beautiful sports, but I think that it's not healthy, especially in the way that we do it. And I understand that very early in my career. So I just figured, well, in the wintertime, I'm going to do all this stuff to counter that. And I think, like, ski touring and cross country skiing really do, because you're working such a different group set of muscles, and still doing good endurance sport that you love and kind of are addicted to, but also kind of addressing other things that structurally that need addressing.
They should have subbed you in when you came back so ripped after that jiu-jitsu part. They should have subbed you in for the track cycling there. You would have been one of those
Well,
massive track cycling sprinters.
yeah, that's the problem, is I still didn't have any fast twitch, so that would have been a rubbish idea, I reckon. But yeah, I remember I did do, like, at those Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, I did my first pursuit ever. Like, I'd never ridden on the track, and they're like, "Oh, you'd be good at the pursuit. You want to go do that?" I was like, "Sure, yeah." So, out there on a double disc track bike on the track, like, yeah, that was wild experience.
Oh man, did you do much of that track cycling outside of that? A couple years of it, or?
After, no, I'd never been on the track prior to that, not once. And then after that, I got quite hooked on the track. Like um, that build up to the Olympics, I was actually supposed to go with Zach Bell as his Madison partner in that same Beijing Olympics, but there was a lot of political stuff going, as there always is with Olympic stuff with the Quebec guys. So yeah, I really enjoyed the track, the Madison and points race and all that stuff was very, very cool.
Love it. So I want to dive into some of these legendary stories. So I might the way I might go about this is I might just give you like a cue or kind of a word, and then you can kind of take it from there and see what the meaning means to you. So one of the pieces I had heard about from may have been earlier in your career was you living the hobo life. What did that mean?
Yeah, well, prior to cycling, I was massively into climbing mountains, so I was quite obsessed with that. And we were just working odd jobs to travel around and climb mountains and spend time in the backcountry. And then once we kind of realized, okay, hitchhiking, that works, to get to the Rockies. And then we started, one of the jobs we actually were doing was stacking railway ties. So we were just, you know, doing this horrible labor job. But trains were going by all day, and they'd stop in the switch yard, and we got the idea one day, oh, let's hop on one, see like if it'll take us into town. We were just outside of Revelstoke in those days. And so then we got a ride into Revelstoke. It was free. And we're just like, shit, like this would be a cool way to travel. And so from there, we were just traveling around by train, hitchhiking, and then that kind of started me on the bike, because I also realized, once you had a bike, basically it was free to travel. So then I rode up to Alaska on one of my, like, that was my second big trip. And I was just really like, I was like a hobo, because I would do these odd jobs, baling hay and painting a fence, or, helping a guy dig a ditch. And that's what I thought my life was going to be, traveling around. I had plans to go down to South America. I was going to ride down to Argentina. I was basically, that's what I thought I was going to do with my life. And road racing drastically changed that. But I will always say, like, seriously, some of the best years of my life, some of my best memories are from that era. So yeah, I was pretty much a hobo for quite a few years there.
And you mentioned the Alaska trips. I had heard you were like carrying your dog Bear around on a wagon during that time.
Yeah, I built a little trailer to haul all the gear, like, because we had a lot of climbing gear I was bringing with me too. So yeah, the dog, he was good. Like he knew how to, we'd hit the hills, he knew to jump off, and he'd run on like up the climbs, help hauling his ass around. And then in the headwinds, he would just timber cruise, just run alongside us. So yeah, that was great. Great
How
living.
big of a dog are we talking about here?
Oh, he was a Chow German Shepherd Rottweiler. So I reckon he was about 60, 70 pounds kind of thing.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be tough dragging up a hill.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. You felt it when he hopped back in. That's for sure.
So you're just yelling at the back, Bear, get out, start running. Like,
Well, it's funny. Like initially, like that's how it is. But then like over, months of doing that, life on the road, he knew, like once we got down to a certain speed, boom, he was out, because he wanted to be out too, right? Like
yeah,
he doesn't like, I mean, he enjoyed having a rest, don't get me wrong, but he'd rather be out running around in the woods, right?
I love it. That's so awesome. Another one I'd heard about was early in your career, you living in a trailer. So I think you and another fellow rider of yours were nicknamed the Trailer Park Boys at some point.
That's true. Yeah. Kev Cunningham, great man, who started the symmetric cycling team. He took Christian Meyer and us, Christian Meyer and myself, he had a big property, big 10 acres. And we bought some travel trailers, because like we just needed a place to train. And we were traveling so much those years, like down to South America, all over. So it was like, you didn't need anything fancy. You just needed a place to kind of keep your stuff and somewhere warm to come back and train, So yeah, we lived down by the barn, and yeah, that was also a great time. Like, again, you don't realize it at the time when you're young, but like what you have, I guess it's just your perspective, but the thing of value now is time for me. And I just felt like I had time in droves in those days. Like, nothing mattered. I didn't really like, there was no, yeah, I wanted to be a professional cyclist, but it didn't really matter. Had so much fun doing what I was doing at the time. And it just seemed no stress to like do anything else. It was a really, really nice time. Yeah.
That's epic. And then another one I had heard about was, I feel like this is the most Canadian story ever. You fighting off a wolf with an aluminum hockey stick.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. We were way up in on the Alaska Highway on a real, like, I don't know how much it's paved nowadays, but in those days there's a lot of sections of just gravel, and there's just like coming into Whitehorse, there's actually on the Continental Divide. Actually, I'd slept up there because I'd been climbing up and down on these big rollers all day, and it's also the land of the midnight sun, so it's like quite bright at night still. And I remember sleeping. I had like kind of a bivy bag set up that first trip, and my dog is growling, and like sometimes it's just a little animal or something, causing them to, and he just wouldn't shut up. I'm like, hey, trying to go to sleep. It's already too bright, and I'm cracked. I'm tired. And he keeps growling, and then you hear this rustling in the bushes getting closer. You're like, that sounds pretty big, And then all of a sudden he just takes off. I mean, he was wild, this dog. He would, he'd be chasing moose and take on bears. He was just like not afraid of anything. And well, he started tangling with this wolf. And this wolf would have been sick. It would have been, it looked super skinny and sickly. So it was obviously outcast of the pack. And I think they tend to get desperate in these times. And so I think he was just trying to see, like, yeah, what he could get from us. And so they're going at it. And I'd found this hockey stick earlier on, like on the trip. And I was using it as a kickstand for, like, I just put under the seat of the bike to just stand the bike. So I didn't have to lay it down with the trailer hitch. It was kind of janky, And so I'm grabbed that right away, and I go over and I'm just like taking cracks at like this massive dogs that is just like going. I mean, you've heard dogs fight. It's not the greatest sound in the world. And yeah, just smashing away, trying to hit this wolf. And they're going at it, and then the wolf takes off, and my dog chases, and I'm screaming and fuck. And then he comes back like an hour later, and I'm still like, you're just adrenalized. And I was just like, okay, I can't stay here. I packed everything up. This is like 3 a.m. now. Pack everything up and just went down the road. Like, and I just kept riding because I was just like, I'm not going to be able to sleep,
No.
after that whole situation, or close to that area again. It was just kind of yeah, it was a wild experience for sure.
I love it. Those are some good ones. We'll leave it at that for the stories. I'm sure you could go with about 50 more of those in a row. So we'll have to
Yeah.
get you on in the future and cross the rest of them off the list. But I'd love to hop into a little bit about what you've been doing since your retirement from pro cycling. So I understand you have a tour company, Tuft Tours, I believe it's called. What are you doing with that, and kind of what are some of the destinations and the vibe around those trips?
Yeah, well, I've been, that's initially what I was planning to start up in Andorra. And I thought, oh, well, I'll continue that on here in British Columbia. So I've kind of been chipping away at that, trying to put some trips together and just getting a kind of understanding of what's going on here with the gravel scene and a lot of that stuff, and just trying to figure out what people exactly are looking for. So yeah, like trying to cater to trips here in British Columbia or Canada, of like loops that connect, whether you want to go camping, whether you want to go like hotel, arranging all of that stuff. So like, the day is solid, it's beautiful, it's all of those things. But then in the case of like the hotel route, you have all the comforts, good meal, um, everything's dialed with your bike, sorted out the next day. Or you can go the more hardcore route where you're tenting it out and kind of having that experience, which is a whole other level. So it's really trying to figure out what people are after and what they're doing. So you can, if anyone is interested, they can reach out on I have a website, tuftcamps.com, or even on Instagram, just Svein.Tuft. You can direct message if you want to have a chat about a trip. But that's kind of what I've been up to. But I've also been busy with the National Cycling League, working with my team, the Denver Disruptors, and we've had some good successes this year so far. So that's been fun too, because cycling is really what I know the most out of all the things I've been doing in my life. It's probably the thing I understand the best. So that's been a really nice experience. And being back in that environment, working with riders, it's very comfortable for me, but also I enjoy that aspect. It's really nice.
Love it. And what are you doing kind of with the team there? Like, what's kind of your role? Are you setting like all their training, and do you see them in person, or is it a lot of kind of remote type of stuff and then meeting up for races? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm the head coach, which is essentially like a director criteriums, and we just did the Joe Martin stage race, won the overall there. So like, I'm traveling, going to races, and I'm kind of working directly with the athletes day in and day out. Not necessarily in the sense of building their training program, because a lot of them have their coaches. It would be too much. I have 16 athletes. It would be hard to manage all of that. But more along the lines of planning and guiding through that, how to prepare for the races to come, and then just going over schedules and a lot of that stuff. So the logistics side of things. But and then at the races, I'm all hands on and part of, like, we're race meetings, debriefs, and on the side. And you're working with these people while you're there. It's full on.
Love
It's
it. So in your own training, what bike are you spending the most amount of time on these days, and what's your kind of weekly training looking like these days?
look, the snow just melted here, so I'm off the skis. So that's been nice to get back on the bike. I ride the gravel bike, I would say 60 to 70% of the time, and the rest is like road or mountain bike. And I just find the gravel bike for what I love, like exploring. It's just so versatile. Like, if you have to ride a gnarly mountain bike trail, you can. It's not the best, but then you can actually haul ass on the ride home if you have to go on the road. So it's a great bike, super comfortable, and for me, it's just a great all around tool. So spend a lot of time in the gravel rig.
You ever break the TT bike out anymore?
No, but I'd love to. I'd love to get on like a modern day rig and just, although there's also that part of me that knows like how obsessed you have to become to get like that good feeling again. So it's kind of, I'm kind of afraid of that, because it's just, I've only so much bandwidth for things right now. And I know that there is that crazy side of me. If I start to get that fix, I'll be like trying to figure out how I can get out for some training, and I don't, as much as I love that and respect that, I don't need any more of that in my life, really. Like, I love to ride, and I still love training. Like, I love pushing myself, but it's just different, like, to get that top level or that feeling of that top level, it's so hard, and it takes so much time. And I got to do that for 20 some odd years, so I count myself very lucky.
So looking forward, what adventures for either this year or kind of beyond this year are getting you excited for things that you still want to knock off the bucket list?
Well, there's so much to do in this part of the world. I think I could be busy for the rest of my life here. There's just so much. Um, there's a route I'll probably do in June. It's like a 3 or 4 day trip up over, yeah, from here heading north up into Trout Lake. And yeah, I mean, it's just that stuff. I get excited pulling the maps out. Um, and that'll be a 3 or 4 day trip. That's what gets me going nowadays, is like when I get those little moments to go blast out and explore this area. So I'm excited about that. We're doing a trip with 7 Mesh at the end of the summer up into the Cassiar Highway, going north up into the Yukon to kind of almost like retrace the early touring days. And so to explore that whole route. So looking forward to that trip. Yeah, but then I think what really gets my motor going these days is the high alpine mountain bike traverses. So like we have an area nearby Retallick, um, this whole like area, like the Kokanee Park Glacier area, the Valhallas. There's so much cool stuff, and one of the best things is when you can get your mountain bike up into those high alpine areas and do these big descents off these massive peaks, like on a pretty gnarly route. That's pretty fun. I started getting into that quite a bit last summer, and it's big days. It's a lot of bushwhacking. It's a lot of carrying the bike up the side of a mountain. But for the riding that you get, it's just, I mean, it's all, there's no trail or anything like that. You're just kind of taking, yeah, just picking your own route. That's been a blast. So I'm
How do
looking forward to doing more of that.
how do you do those descents if there's no real route to follow? You're just like weaving
Well,
between trees.
yeah, so it's like a lot of it is like when you get up into that real high country, it's kind of shale, kind of alpine, like tundra. Like it's really nice. Like certain areas, like especially this Retallick area, it's really wide open. It's not treed. It's not bushy, because it's just most of the year it's covered in snow, right? So yeah, it's incredible because you can really like choose your own adventure. And some of the places, there's old like game trails and like like kind of natural trails that the animals use, right? So you use some of that. But I will say it definitely comes with a fair amount of bushwhacking. So you got to just be up for a gnarly day.
That sounds unreal. All right, as we wrap up here, so the question we always finish with, and it's funny, we ended up reaching out to you to come on the show here after Allison Jackson had mentioned you as one of her endurance icons. So who
Whoa,
is your endurance
that's pretty.
icon?
That's big props. Jeez, yeah. Um, yeah, it's a good question. Um, yeah, I have to think about that one actually. Yeah, it's funny because I never really.
Anyone
No.
coming up that inspired you to like get into it, or you were just kind of a free spirit that just paved your own path, and
Well,
maybe you don't have them, which is totally okay.
I think that's it, and I just didn't pay attention. Like when I was coming up, I didn't pay attention to what other people were doing, or like I was maybe just stuck in my own world so much that I wasn't like, I remember being at like my first big world tour races, and I wouldn't have been able to name who's who or anything like that, right? It's not a disrespect thing. It's just that I never really looked at it. I was just doing my thing, and I there's people I definitely respect, like I think of teammates. I'll say like my teammate Luke Durbridge over the years, was a guy I saw come up through the ranks, and just a dedicated, hardworking guy, like everything he got, he deserves, and I guess for me, that's just the people I respect, the people who get after it, don't make a big story about it, a big Instagram story about it. They're just reliable, solid people. And that goes back to Allison Jackson, like all the respect to her, because she does her thing, right? And she's not, yeah, I mean, just consistent, strong, and working hard year in and year out, and not those are the people I respect. So that actually is quite a few people, right? So
I love it. Yeah, that's
yeah.
what makes you who you are. That's friggin' awesome. So yeah, been such a great conversation today. What is the best way people can follow along for your journey?
I don't really post a lot, but yeah, I think like every now and then I'll do like a Instagram story or something. If if the ski tour was real nice or the bike trip was really good, I'll throw something up there. So yeah, it's just Swain.Tuft. And then yeah, if you like I said, if you want to reach out, tuftcamps.com. That's probably one of the easier ways.
Amazing. We'll link to all that in the show notes, but I think we need some live GoPro footage of you going down one of those mountains through the trees without
Yeah,
a trail, and I think that would be a
yeah,
hit on Instagram for people.
yeah. I don't think like I always feel like I'm those extreme guys in the videos, but then if I watch myself, I'm like, oh, pretty lame, but it
You have to
feels
go
it
like
feels pretty awesome, you know?
you have to go 2 kilometers an hour just to not
Yeah,
break a collarbone going down there. So
right. Yeah,
too good. Well, thank you very much for the convo. It was awesome to get to meet you and hear all your epic stories, and looking forward to chatting again in the future.
right on. Thank you for having me.
Wow, how great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.